One hint that you have waited too long to do something that you were doing for a while is when you do it and like you pick it up again, and every single piece of software in the stack of software that you use to do that task has an update. So, yeah, it's been quite a while since I made a video, and I decided I wanted to make one. And so I had to update audio hijack and ScreenFlow and just the whole thing. So I've been listening some to Charles Tew, Tew. I forgot. I've listened to enough of his podcasts. I should probably know how to say his name. But who is an objectivist philosopher. It's TEW if you want to look it up. Charles TEW, and he was podcasting and videoing heavily for a while, making YouTube vids. Uh, and then I guess he had some sort of falling out with another objectivist guy who also makes videos, and so Charles just stopped making videos, which is sad. But anyway, that's like gossip, drama, background. Um, I've been listening to his podcasts, and he happened to mention um, this thing that you're looking at, which is from FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. It's a collection of essays called Discovering Ayn Rand. Now, if I recall, Charles just sort of mentioned it indirectly, and like I really had to I had to do a deep Google and like you know figure out, okay, what's what came out around the time of this podcast from Fee about Ayn Rand, and he gave a couple of hints. So I was able to put it together. I don't like that though, and he's mentioned he has an idea of, well, I think maybe he doesn't want to promote bad stuff. He didn't mention that, I think, with this specific material, but he's mentioned it in regards to other stuff, which I think is not a good idea because if readers want to judge something for themselves, or even, and maybe disagree with you, or maybe even just add another criticism that you might agree with, you should give them the opportunity to do that. Instead of sort of semi trying to hide stuff, which it was ineffective anyway, because I figured it out. Anyway, so Fee made this collection of essays, and Charles had some high level sort of general criticisms of them as Fee just trying to sort of make Ayn Rand into a generic, boring libertarian. Um, so that got me interested because that sounded like something I would also disagree with. And I wanted to see some more details of that. So, and then I figure, well, if I'm going to look at that and criticize it, maybe I might as well make a video about it. And there's like a lot of material. So I didn't think I wanted to do sort of like a deep dive fisking um, in detail. Although maybe I'll change my mind and pick one or something. But a video seemed like it might be better for sort of general, broad skimming and criticism of a lot of stuff as sort of a shotgun blast of criticizing lots of little different pieces. So we'll see how that goes. Oh, and I have this over here, this Ulysses window, just in case I have some notes or thoughts or anything. So let's go. Modern essays on her life and ideas. Okay. All right, let's see. Let's see what we're looking at here. Ayn Rand's career advice is still on point. Okay. Action of the victim. Ayn Rand and the Pony Express, their ruled objectivism. Did Edward Snowden draw his main inspiration from Ayn Rand? Oh, they don't like Trump. Crony in chief. Donald Trump epitomizes Ayn Rand's aristocracy of pull by Steve Simpson. So that's interesting. Because while certain there are certain instances or examples of Trump having bad economic policy that favors certain groups, like especially his tariff stuff. Overall, he's characterized by deregulation and wanting less government control. At least, often in fact, in terms of, loosening some environmental restrictions and various things, and certainly also in rhetoric in terms of like at least saying he opposes Obamacare, although that hasn't really been concretized very effectively in his presidency. But you know, I mean, and Obamacare is a great example because you have, talk about aristocracy of pull, where you basically have the government, you know, uh, completely regulating some area of commerce that's important and working with a few heavily regulated, sort of like government created oligopoly of a few entities and literally forcing you to buy their product in violation of the Constitution and the rights of man. Um, that would more epitomize to me aristocracy of pull than some, I don't know, some like tariff BS, but I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, they don't like Trump. Would Ayn Rand approve of rule by a rich and powerful capitalist? No. Um, or I mean, she, because that's sort of like, was Ayn Rand in favor of an aristocracy, maybe in the context of like our current situation where government is just doing a lot of stuff it shouldn't do. She wouldn't be opposed to rich and powerful capitalists. Certainly, she wouldn't be opposed to rich and powerful capitalists running a legitimate government. Like, if in a different society, John Galt was wealthy and became president, that would be fine. But rule, I don't know. I mean, it depends on what you mean by rule and the context that you're importing into that. Trump's ego is actually too small by Dan Sanchez. So that's the second F Trump in this table of contents. By the way, there's something that objectivists talk about sometimes where like Donald Trump is a second hander or whatever. Um, I mean, which, like, I'm sure that's true because most people are and because he's clearly concerned about appearances. But there's degrees of second-handedness. Like second-handedness, you can't just flatten everybody into second-handedness and say, well, he's a second-hander, so he's bad. I mean, certain respects, you could say the person is bad, but there's a whole context there. It's sort of like if, I don't know, Guy Francois and Ivy Starnes are on the ballot, which is basically like the last election. You vote for Guy even though he's a second-hander, like honestly. Um, Anyway, Montreal learned the wrong lesson from Ayn Rand. That's very specific, but okay. Like just geographically, like it doesn't tell me, like one wrong lesson About like oil policy or what? Like there's not a lot of hint there. Anthem and the Meaning of the Light Bulb Ban by Ayn Rand. That sounds like it might be okay. Most of these I'm not. Most of these I'm either not clear what the topic is or it sounds bad, but that one sounds okay. I mean, we're not clear on like where they're going with it. Like Ayn Rand's career advice. Well, I mean, we'll see. I don't know if I'm actually going to read all these. I'm not going to read all of them on the video, but we'll see how much I actually get into and how much I just skim a little bit and say, oh, I'm just going to move on from this. What critics get wrong about Atlas? Mostly. I mean, just one thing offhand is that they don't seem to realize that Atlas Shrugged has bad rich people in it, which is a really just like that's just a factual matter. You know, Oren Boyle is a character in Atlas Shrugged and some other ones like, but they're just like, oh, Ayn Rand liked rich people. She wanted rich people, you know, for everything. And it's no, it depends on how you got the wealth. It depends on the whole context. Well, there's a lot of these. Okay. What Ayn Rand meant by altruism. Oh, yeah. So this is the one. It's page 70. Maybe I'll jump down to that one because that's the one that Charles was really complaining about. And I could see that being especially bad. Ayn Rand on fascism. We must give up our ideals. Well, it depends on what your ideals are. A totalitarian state can only rule a desperately poor society. Well, that's true. Like, in the long run, right? Like, you can always pick out a point. It's like, well, it just became, if you pick out the point, like the second after, or even the year after a totalitarian state has been created, but it's still drifting on the fumes of the liberty that preceded it. You could say, oh, well, see, like people do that a lot with socialism. I was reading something where it was basically arguing that the famous Scandinavian socialist countries were pretty free up until the 60s. And they're still like not fully socialist. They're just they're welfare states that are heavily tilted in one direction, but they're still like mixed economies with a large private sector. Which you can do for a long time. Ayn Rand, Sovietologist. Ayn Rand, A Centennial Appreciation. Ayn Rand's Heroic Life. Ayn, What If Atlas Snapped? That Day I Interviewed Ayn Rand. Daniel Brandon, Rest in Peace. Ayn Rand, The Movies and the Idea of America. So that sounds, this section sounds like it's probably the least interesting to me. So where do we want to start? Well, what Ayn Rand meant by altruism looks pretty short. Let's have a bookmark. You make a PDF and you put bookmarks in it when it's like a collection of essays. Terrible. Oh wait, is there actual links? That might work. Never mind. Although, yeah, there we go. Okay, that works fine. All right, so let me look at this one. What Rand meant by altruism. Rand sold more than 30 million books. Atlas Shrugged has been ranked behind only the Bible as an influence on readers' lives. She has also been stridently attacked for issues such as her militant atheism. But perhaps least understood has been her full-bore rejection of altruism. On her birthday, it is worth reconsideration. I mean, I don't know how much the birthday mattered. Altruism has commonly been held up as the standard for moral behavior. But Rand rejected it, asserting well, really arguing, but it was incompatible with freedom, with capitalism, and with individual rights, and therefore the basic evil behind today's ugliest phenomena. That head-on collision arises from French philosopher Auguste Comte. I'm saying that right. Coiner of the term altruism. The altruist.org website says he believed the only moral acts were those intended to promote the happiness of others. It's just a writing issue, but I'm not sure what head-on collision specifically is being referred to. It says that head-on. Oops. So that head-on collision, like I get the general idea that this person, Mr. Gales, is saying that there's a conflict between Rand and Comtean altruism. That's true, but just the writing is a little strange. Anyway, that's a minor point. So comes Catechisme Positiviste. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm pronouncing it like in Spanish. I always do that when I see French for some reason. It's kind of funny. I don't know French. I know a little Spanish. Asserts that altruism, I think that's, gives a direct sanction exclusively to our instincts of benevolence and therefore cannot tolerate the notion of rights. For such a notion rests on individualism. In Comte's view, any act performed for any reason beyond solely that of advancing someone else's well-being is not morally justified. That implies taking a tax deduction for a charitable act strips it of its morality. The same is true when done because the same is true when something is done because what goes around comes around. Something as seemingly innocuous as feeling good about doing good also fails Comte's joyless standards. Even love your neighbor as yourself fails his unlimited duty of altruism. As George H. Smith summarized it, one should love one's neighbor more than oneself. Ayn Rand's attacks on altruism are aimed at Comte's definition. No, they're aimed at altruism broadly, and certainly including the pure form, which sort of takes everything to its logical conclusion, but also including the mix, which is the prevailing, just like the mixed economy is the prevailing approach to economics in the world right now. There's no laissez-faire capitalism really, and there's very little that's even striving to be pure collective, socialism or communism or whatever you want to call it. Likewise, there's very few purely individualistic people, and there's not really many people making any real effort to try to live by the impossible standard of altruism. But what people do is they hold up altruism as an ideal, and recognizing that as a practical matter, in fact, you can't live by altruism. They nonetheless, so they try to some like limited, inconsistent extent, which causes problems in their life, and which opens them to attack from people who want to get something from them. But then they also smuggle in some individualism, which they feel bad about occasionally, sometimes, although they don't really make any systematic effort to try and resolve that issue. one way or the other, like either moving more consistently towards individualism or really trying to give altruism a go. They just put up with this sort of chronic state of mixed, mixed morality, where they accept the premise of altruism, but then try and live in the world in this confused way. And so, they buy a bunch of stuff for themselves, which they should. I'm not criticizing that. But then they'll give, some amount of money to a beggar because they feel bad, or they'll support some political cause because, it's going to make the world better or something, on altruistic grounds. Um, so, yeah, no, Ayn Rand was not just against the purest form of altruism, although certainly she was against that, but the pure form of altruism is sort of a subset of what Ayn Rand was against, which was uh, altruism completely, altruism as an ideal, altruism as a partially realized thing. Um, no, she was against that. Now that's not to say, and she's argued this very well herself, but just to make it clear for anybody who's not familiar, this is not to say that Ayn Rand was against benevolence or against, you know, charity in any context, or against um, kindness, or anything like that. Um, it's that she was against the idea that the lives of other people um, were sort of the standard, and them being happy was sort of the standard by which you should judge whether an action was good. She says no, you should you know live by the by the standard of your own life, uh realize your own goals, increase your own power, intellectually, financially, whatever values that you want. And then if you want to help other people in the context of a life where you are, primarily fulfilling your own values and figuring out stuff that's of value to you and what you want to do, if you decide, well, I can help this person and it's not a big deal to me, but you see some value in helping the other person, um then that's fine. But it's not a primary. And I remember her saying something like, charity is not a big, it's not a big value. It's not primary. It's fine. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. But it's just not a big deal. So, and it is a big deal if uh, it's motivated on any sort of altruist premise of like, well, because the same act can have different motivations. If you help someone because you see some virtue in them, like that I don't know, they seem to have some genuine intellectual curiosity, and, about some subject that you think is important, and you want to support that because you think there's not enough people that have that curiosity. And so you buy them a book or something, or it could be more than that, but just as an example, as sort of a trivial example, that's totally fine. But if you offer somebody some help because you feel guilty for having so much, that's bad. Um, because, you know, and again, I'm assuming a context of like you've earned what you have legitimately and all that sort of thing. You're not like a criminal or something. But if you have a job, you've worked hard, you've paid your way. Um, Nobody has a claim on you and should allow you to feel, should cause you to feel guilty, because they have less and you have more or something like that. Um, and this sort of double think about altruism is rampant in our society. Um, and there's cliches about it, like limousine liberals and stuff. But we have all these people that are clamoring for socialism and state redistribution of wealth. But like award shows in their fancy clothes, where they took a jet to ride into, um, and they're going back out to their fancy car and checking stuff on Twitter on their iPhone. It's just it's ridiculous, and it's because they're not real thinkers. They're not even trying to live their life in an integrated way. They're just trying to virtue signal, um, not to actually be virtuous, but to be to be hip, to be cool, and to maybe assuage their guilty conscience for the every once in a while when they focus on that and they feel a bit guilty, and then they say, "Oh, well, I gave $100,000 to the Democrats, so I feel better now, so I'll go back to being a rich hedonist or whatever." Anyway, so continues. However, modern usage has eroded his meaning of altruism. It's a little more than a synonym for generosity. Saran's rejection of the original meaning is now often taken as a rejection of generosity, which is not. Well, if anybody does that, they're not reading Rand. I was trying to keep the screen uncluttered, but as soon as I wanted to resolve an issue regarding some words, out comes the dictionary and Apple Books and the whole lot. Anyway, so this article of Mr. Gales, it says, however, modern usage has eroded his, meaning Comte's, meaning of altruism to little more than a synonym for generosity. Saran's rejection of the original meaning is now often taken as a rejection of generosity, which it is not. Now, first of all, I would say often taken by whom and why are they reading Rand illiterately? And then the second, that sounds a little harsh, right? The second point is that I guess it somewhat depends on what you mean by generosity, and the context that exists in. But for the first issue, for just because we could certainly imagine a definition of a way of understanding generosity that is compatible, that is something that Rand would be okay with. And so, sort of assuming that, and I looked up some definitions. Let's see here: Webster's third, liberality in spirit or act, and some synonyms: magnanimity, benevolence. Certainly, or quality of being kind and generous. I mean, kindness is fine. Readiness or liberality in giving, that's not necessarily bad, but it depends. Freedom from meanness or smallness of mind or character, certainly that would be okay. So this is philosophy who needs it. I brought up here. Faith and force destroyers of the modern world. I managed to find it using a lexicon. I thought for some reason that this quote was in the virtue of selfishness, and I searched that. I couldn't find it, so I decided to just break out the lexicon and hope it would be there. So do not confuse altruism with kindness, goodwill, or respect for the rights of others. These are not primaries, but consequences, which in fact altruism makes impossible. The irreducible primary of altruism, the basic absolute, is self-sacrifice, which means self-immolation, self-abnegation, self-denial, self-destruction, which means the self as a standard of evil, the selfless as a standard of the good. So she's explicitly saying, it doesn't, she's not taking altruism to be some sort of synonym with some vague notion of, some kindness or goodwill. She's taking it precisely, and she's drawing out the logical consequences of taking it seriously. So if somebody's reading Rand, like, why aren't they reading Philosophy Who Needs It? That's like an introductory, text on this issue. Or, it's an introductory text on Rand. Like, it's a broader oriented, it's not super technical. It's not like, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology or something. Anyway, there's something else I wanted to say, actually, which is, when, like you have to look somewhat at the cultural context. Like, consider the fact that, we hear people like Bernie Sanders saying that billionaires shouldn't exist. I guess maybe he upped it. I've read, and I haven't verified this myself, but it sounds true that he used to say millionaires shouldn't exist, but now he's a millionaire, so he had to recalibrate a little bit. But when people like Bernie Sanders say billionaires shouldn't exist, is that really compatible with altruism, meaning just a synonym for generosity? Like, or does it mean that really altruism is being taken more fully seriously by some people in our culture today? I want to read a bit more, any good analysis of what Rand means should involve reading some amount of Rand. So in that spirit, I'm just going to read the next paragraph after the paragraph I already read, because I think it's really good. I just happened to see it because it's like the next one, right? Hopefully this doesn't carry into just like reading the whole book. Although there's worse YouTube videos that one could make than reading a bunch of Rand. Do not hide behind such superficialities as whether you should or should not give a dime to a beggar. That is not the issue. The issue is whether you do or do not have the right to exist without giving him that dime. The issue is whether you must keep buying your life dime by dime from any beggar who might choose to approach you. The issue is whether the need of others is the first mortgage on your life and the moral purpose of your existence. The issue is whether man is to be regarded as a sacrificial animal. Any man of self-esteem will answer no. Altruism says yes. Right. I mean, and when you get to should billionaires exist, it's essentially, there's no amount of dimes that will let you, or it's what gets you out of that category. Like, to whatever they say, whatever the Democrats set the maximum income to in the Sanders administration, right? That's where you can exist at. But then, say, well, billionaires shouldn't exist. But say some people say, well, billionaires shouldn't exist, but I guess 100 million is okay. Well, why that? There'll still be some people starving somewhere, right? So how can you justify that? So then you just get communism by degrees. Unless you sort of strike at the root and say no, in the context of a free society, wealth is earned. No, you brutish idiot, it doesn't mean that somebody literally worked 100,000 times harder than another person when they become rich. It means, that's something I've seen recently, it means that they figured out some valuable service or product or whatever using their mind, and engaged in trades that millions of people got value out of. And it's good that they were able to earn that wealth, and it's moral and proper that they should receive the benefit of that for what they provided to the world. Unless you go there and present that fully consistent case, then then we are going to get sort of communism by degrees. The minimum wage and wealth redistribution drifting upward, and the tolerance, for wealth drifting downward as the tax rate drifts upward, or maybe they'll just start confiscating wealth. I don't know. And then we'll be Venezuela in a few decades. So it's really important to have that view of what altruism really means, and its political consequences, especially if you're going to be the foundation for economic education and doing political and economic commentary reaching out to the masses. I think, and I guess, and this is what Charles was taking issue with, and I guess having now read a little bit of this, I agree. This sort of soft selling of Rand, it's doing a disservice to her and perhaps alienating better people, because basically, like, the libertarians are libertarians because they don't like rejecting altruism, because they don't want to be like objectivist weirdos or whatever. It's not because you can be engaged with libertarianism in a serious way and not hear about Ayn Rand. So, a lot of people, maybe they never even heard of her. They just lack a basic familiarity. There's still some responsibility for that, but libertarians, my point is, libertarians are not in that group. They've certainly heard of Ayn Rand. A lot of them have read at least some of her work. Maybe not very effectively, but they've had some exposure. And they didn't like something about it. And so, but then rather than, respecting that disagreement and maybe trying to resolve it, then sometimes they try and soft pedal her. And we saw the sort of the first soft pedaling here, and I've looked ahead a bit, just my eyes glancing ahead, and it gets worse. But this Ayn Rand's attacks on altruism are aimed at Comte's definition. That's trying to minimize the scope of what Ayn Rand is saying for criticism of altruism to the most consistent form, as opposed to, no, she rejected altruism categorically. She thought it was pure evil and poison and not good to any degree. Now you have to understand precisely what she meant by altruism. But if you actually read her stuff, then you can avoid misunderstandings that are apparently often taken. So this author continues, he quotes, in Roderick Long's words, that name sounds vaguely familiar to me, but I don't know who that is offhand. Her sometimes misleading rhetoric about the virtue of selfishness, again, misleading why and to whom, was not to advocate the pursuit of one's own interest at the expense of others. That's like, I don't know how more extensively she could have covered. Like, if he's saying that's the misleading part, that's extensively covered, like, everywhere. Like, just read her stuff. I mean, she talks about repeatedly about the false dichotomy of, sacrificing yourself to others or sacrificing others to yourself, as two sides of the same coin, two sides of the same false dichotomy, of the same misconception, which is that action, is that morality has to involve sacrifice of somebody to somebody. She said no, it doesn't. She rejects the whole premise. She rejected not only the subordination of one's interests to those of others, and it is this rather than mere benevolence that she labeled altruism, but also the subordination of others' interests to one's own. Okay, well, that sounds, I mean, it's weird because he says misleading rhetoric, but then he kind of just restates her position. That's kind of weird. I mean, maybe this guy isn't being fairly quoted or something. There's a lot of ellipses. Anyway, Rand's categorical rejection of altruism was a rejection of Comte's requirement of total selflessness. No. I mean, that's not a full statement. Rand's categorical rejection of altruism was a categorical rejection of altruism, including a rejection of total selflessness, and any lesser degree thereof. Like, she rejected 100% selflessness, she rejected 1% selflessness. You can't really, I mean, 1% selflessness isn't even really like a stable, like if you're that close to Rourke, I mean, you know, a lot of people are more like, I don't know, there's a higher percentage than that. Because it's just like if you're that close to Rourke, then you haven't even, you've just like not, you've got like the intellectual equipment in place. You just haven't taken a full inventory of your mind and your values or something. But you're pretty close. So this continues, because that was inconsistent with any individuals mattering for their own sake. So just to give you a sense of the level of underselling of Rand's ideas in this, by saying she rejected total selflessness. So I'm gonna, and I just actually noticed this juxtaposition, and I have to notice that sort of thing when I'm going back and reading around, like, hey, I didn't notice this exact parallel at different points in the book before, but when you search for things, you notice. So to give you a sense of the extent to which Rand rejected even a scintilla of selflessness, of altruism, even the smallest bit. So one of the worst characters, Peter Keating's mom. Peter Keating is the sort of uber second-hander in The Fountainhead who shows the problems with leading a second-handed life through his life and how he lives it. And Peter Keating wants to marry this girl, but his mother doesn't approve and wants like a better match for him, you know, socially. And, you know, she says, it's not important, but, you know, she's doing the fake, like, oh, you know, don't mind just little old me, but it'd be nice if you thought of me, sort of like manipulative thing. And she says, it's not important, but take just a tiny notice of that. Think of yourself for an hour, but give 1 minute to the thought of others, right? So this is one of the worst, you know, characters in the book saying this. Think of yourself for an hour, but give 1 minute to the thought of others. And what does Rourke say? I came here to say that I do not recognize anyone's right to 1 minute of my life, nor to any part of my energy, nor to any achievement of mine, no matter what the claim, how large their number, or how great their need. So that's a big contrast, right? So it wasn't just total selflessness that Rand rejected. She rejected any selflessness. She rejected any self-sacrifice. She rejected any altruism, comprehensively, 100%, fully, down to the root. And one thing, I don't know how much that background noise is getting picked up, but one thing that I find, All right, there's some background racket that was distracting. So one thing that I really don't like here is they're partially restating Rand's stuff, but also softening her, but in a very subtle and confusing way where it's just like you have to be like an objectivist to spot the error already. And that's really because it seems like it's sort of agreeing where it's like, oh yeah, Rand disagreed with Comte. Like if you take it vaguely and generally and you just get a gist from it, it seems like it's roughly accurate or consistent with other stuff that you might have heard. But it is softening her view, and this is material that I think, is maybe oriented towards people who don't have prior exposure to Rand, so it gives them a really misleading picture of her seriousness about the altruism issue. And like that sort of thing is common, like when somebody takes a really strong position that stands out on something, like, Mises saying, socialism is impossible. It's not a way of organizing society. It can't work. It just, no go. And then people will be like, oh, well, what he meant was, oh, no, what he meant was what he said. And I get that it can be difficult to wrap your brain around that sort of thing. But if the counterintuitiveness of a bold original idea is difficult for you to wrap your brain around, then you shouldn't be writing about like what Rand meant by altruism essays, Anyway, so Rand vehemently opposed such an invalidation, meaning an invalidation of individuals mattering for their own sake, I guess, of individual significance. Okay. And then they quote Rand, apparently without any citation, which is really weird. But the basic principle of altruism is that man has no right to exist for his own sake, that service to others is the only justification of his existence, and that self-sacrifice is his highest moral duty, virtue, and value. Okay. Rand's virtue of selfishness was a response to Comte's demand for complete selflessness. Not only is there a requirement for everyone to completely disregard themselves an unattainable ideal, it is self-contradictory. Well, it is unattainable. Again, this is a little muddy because it says not only is there a requirement for everyone to completely disregard themselves an unattainable ideal, it is self-contradictory. Because self-contradictory is a stronger, like, logical claim, but unattainable ideal sort of sounds kind of like when people say, well, socialism is good in theory, but not in practice. It'd be nice if we could do it, but it's, we can't actually do it, maybe. And sometimes they say, because like men aren't good enough to do socialism, which is like, that argument is one of the reasons why socialism is on the march. Because, it's sort of like a challenge, like, oh, of course we can be good enough. But it's like, altruism is a bad ideal. One thing is it's, by venerating others' need, you sort of elevate the suffering, misery, and poverty or whatever of others into a sort of a primary value. And so you need it to be moral. Like somebody, if the good is doing for others, then you need others to do good for. And like the worse off they are, how people seem to take it is like the worse off other people are, then that's like a bigger opportunity for you to do good. Um, so then you're just like looking, like rather than focusing on your own life and trying to improve that, which is the thing that you have most direct control over, is your life, your mind. Um, you sort of go on this fishing expedition, finding finding like the most miserable people you can find, in order to help them. And if you can't find any, maybe you make up some people who are suffering, which is kind of like what the whole grievance SJW thing is about. Um, Studies and all that. And it's also just bad for one's psychology to be this sort of person who's like, you know, looking for unfortunate victims of life to dispense favor to from on high. That's not gonna, as opposed to being, a self-interested trader who's seeking out and offering values. Those are two very different ways of approaching life. I think I chose well on the essay that I decided to discuss. I seem to have a lot to say about it. So this person continues. So they say, not only is it a requirement for everyone to completely disregard themselves as an unattainable ideal, it is self-contradictory. You cannot possibly sacrifice yourself fully for me while I am also sacrificing myself fully for you. Now, this doesn't give a lot of detail as to what the author has in mind, but I'm guessing it's something along the lines of like, if X is trying to sacrifice for Y's benefit, then X is giving up some values for Y, and then if Y is doing the same, then they're both giving up things for each other. They're also getting values, so then maybe they would have to, even if it's like unwanted gift tier values, it's still a value, so then they would have to give those values up to the other person, and so it's just sort of it's like circle or something like that. But I don't like I assuming that's what they had in mind. I see what they're saying, but like I think there's better criticisms of altruism than that. One example, which I don't know if this person deals with, but given the length of the essay, I'm just reading ahead a little bit here. I'm thinking, yeah, it doesn't seem like they're going to mention it, but the 20th Century Motor Company and Atlas Shrugged, is a great example of the morality of altruism in practice, an example of like the things that go wrong. And one of the things is, if you can't benefit yourself, if you work harder, you don't get the benefit. If you come up with a new invention, or you get such an attenuated amount of the benefit, like one divided by the number of people who your value is being redistributed to. Then what's the real benefit to you of creating values? Like what's the point? What do you, if you're just gonna get such a tiny, if you're gonna have to do a whole bunch of extra work to get a tiny benefit, like why bother? And so then maybe people try and resorting to coercion in order to get the best work out of you. So then we transition from a system in which people are incentivized by monetary rewards and values to create value into a system in which people, have to deal with whips and chains and guns as their incentive, quote unquote, to create value. And you might say, well, that sounds like an issue of socialism or communism instead of altruism. But altruism is just, I mean, communism is just in a way the sort of the political implementation of altruism, from each according to his ability to each according to his need, is very consistent with the values of altruism. Another issue is, you can't actually, like, the individual person is in the best position to know, like, what he values and what he wants. So he's the one who should be taking the actions to get the values that he wants in the world, as opposed to relying on or having other people act for his benefit. It's kind of like, gifts often don't work that well. There's, like, if particularly badly if the person is like picky about or has strong preferences about the thing that you're trying to get them a gift for. Because it's like it might be hard for them when they're doing it to figure out what they should buy, even though they know they have like the best idea of what they want. And if another person tries to figure out what to get them, then it just doesn't work. And so, you base a whole morality around trying to, put others above yourself. It's going to be a mess because nobody's going to be acting to serve the thing that he has the most knowledge about how to serve, which is his own life. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of arguments, and there's the fact that somebody has the fact that somebody is worse off is not a claim against anybody else. Like, you didn't hurt, assuming a standard context, like, you didn't hurt them, you didn't steal from them. The fact that somebody's poor, you don't have to, as like Rand said, buy your life dime by dime from every beggar. So there's you could argue against altruism in lots of different ways. If you're going to go the logical route, you should maybe spell it out a little bit more. So let's continue. And if no one has any intrinsic value, why would the results, even if possible, be meritorious? The trick there that people do is, well, they say rather than, serving other people per se, what you sacrifice for is like the collective good, the society, the people, the class, the state, the race, whatever. That's what they say you should be sacrificing for. Right, because, yeah, if you're just moving things around from one entity which can't exist for his own sake to another, like, what's the point of that? But if you're moving values around for the benefit of the God state or whatever, then maybe you have something, right? With Comte as a starting point, more attention to people's own well-being, more selfishness in Rand's terminology, is the only way to move towards recognizing value in each individual and significance in each life. More attention. See, so this is a subtle twisting of Rand and watering down of Rand's views. So he's like, so on one side we have Comte, but then, but the way this is framed really weird. So it's taking Comte as the starting point, and then it's saying we're sort of like moving along a continuum with what Rand says towards more selfishness, but not like full selfishness, just more. But maybe we don't want to go to extremes, Comte's conception of altruism is also inconsistent with liberty, which was Rand's focus. The duty to put others first at all times and in all circumstances. So again, these qualifiers. denies self-ownership and the power to choose that derives from it. Everyone else maintains never-ending presumptive claims on every individual. That's, overriding any rights they may have. In contrast, benevolence involves voluntary choices to benefit others of one's own choosing, in ways and to the extent individuals choose for themselves. Now, this is strange because you can absolutely have altruism in a situation where, well, I guess it's saying Comte's conception of altruism. So again, it's saying there's Comte's conception of altruism, which is bad, and that's what Rand was criticizing. But Rand was also criticizing giving money to like the Friends of Global Progress in a society in which you did have some rights still, in which you did have some property, as like, that being giving money to your own destroyers and that being a bad thing to do. We see that, I guess Bezos or somebody's giving like 10 billion to climate change or something. So, let's see. Yeah, 10 billion. So, you think if the people involved in climate change activism had absolute power, that all those Amazon trucks would be rolling around delivering goods for people and using fossil fuels? I don't think so. But anyway, so my point is you can actually voluntarily choose to act in ways which are consistent with the morality of altruism and ultimately erode liberty and destroy the values that make your life and your well-being possible. But it doesn't have to be sort of fully realized altruism to the extent that can even exist, in order to be a problem and in order to be the sort of thing that Rand was criticizing. This is why Rand criticized equating altruism with benevolence. The key distinction is between benevolence's individual discretion, which is not, yes, you have individual discretion in judging, judging your own values, judging what values you have to offer, how much, you can like gift somebody or whatever, judging who is the best recipient of such gifts from the people you're aware of and then judging to give it to that person. But it's not just like whimsy or whim or anything like that. So, and they don't say that, but it's just worth being clear. Which recognizes our rights over ourselves and our resources, and altruism's unconditional requirement to always sacrifice for others. Well, now, if, again, like most altruistic acts that are performed that are bad, they're all bad. Well, the motivation is bad. Maybe sometimes somebody does an altruistic thing and it works out for the good by accident. But IRL altruism, is not, people aren't living lives where they're meeting an unconditional requirement to always sacrifice for others. They're exercising, some discretion. Now, it's typically not according to any sort of objective principles that could be defended, where like if you looked at their life and you say, well, why'd you help this person and not that person based on your principles, they'd be like, but this is so this whole piece is basically taking a pure form of altruism and then saying that that's, that's what Rand was criticizing. And it shifts the whole focus and meaning of her work, and particularly if you understand how much she was against compromise and having mixed premises and all that sort of thing, you would maybe understand more that this isn't some minor pedantic point. This has real significance. An omnipresent duty of self-sacrifice also makes people vulnerable to manipulation by those who disguise power over others as really a means to attain some noble goal. Omnipresent duty of self-sacrifice also makes. I mean, altruist ideals in general, even if people are not, living them consistently, yeah, I mean, they do help the bad people, sure. The desire to sacrifice for the good of others can be transformed into the requirement to sacrifice to the desires of leaders, as Rand expressed it. And again, no quote. I mean, no cite. Is it coming? That's so weird. Who does that? Those who start by saying it is selfish to pursue your own wishes, you must sacrifice them to the wishes of others, and by saying it is selfish to uphold your convictions, you must sacrifice them to the convictions of others. What I'm getting from this Rand quote here is, like, there's thought and action are intimately linked, and if you can't pursue what you think is right, you can't use your judgment to act in the world. And how can you even, if you can't act on your ideas, then you're going to lose them. You can't sever that connection. So you've accepted the premise that people are asking you to accept. If somebody says it is selfish to pursue your own wishes, you must sacrifice them to the wishes of others, and you say, okay. Then when they say it is selfish to uphold your convictions, you must sacrifice them to the convictions of others. Then on what basis are you going to say no? The key here is Rand's emphasis on duty. Okay. So incidentally, I was Googling for the source of this quote and actually came across what appears to be like the same article by this Gary Gales guy, but under a different name. I want you to guess the name of the article. Pause the video and then, have a guess and then come back. So I'm going to rely on you having already paused. So his alternate name for this article was No, Ayn Rand did not want us to be selfish. Which, man, if that doesn't make it clear his disagreement with Rand, who, I don't like to do that thing that people do where they're like, need anything more be said too often, but sometimes it's really appropriate. When somebody titles one of their books The Virtue of Selfishness, and then has in the introduction to said book that she gets the question, why do you use the word selfishness to denote virtuous qualities of character when that word antagonizes so many people to whom it does not mean the things you mean? And then she says, my answer is for the reason that makes you afraid of it. And then you're just gonna deny that? And not even deny it openly, but deny it in this sort of weird, subtle mangling of Rand and her meaning and her purpose. This was more open, at least. This was better titled. But yeah, like it's sort of, if you think no, Ayn Rand did not want us to be selfish, you're sort of prima facie disqualified for writing what Rand meant by altruism. You know? Anyway, that was an unexpected detour. Maybe I'll put that in the. I should link this fee thing too, probably. I think I'm just gonna do this one essay because, yeah, I mean, I picked the right one, I guess. I hope they aren't all as bad. That would be terrible. At least this one was short because, I think I partially picked it for the title and partially picked it because it was short because I suspected I might have a lot to say. And then if you pick a long thing, then it could become like a multi-day effort to make a video about it. So this has been fun though. Okay. So, unsourced quote. When A needs something, I just can't get over the lack of citations. Sorry. When A needs something in B's opinion, if C, who can wait. When A needs something in B's opinion, if C, who can do something about it, refuses, if C, who can do something about it, refuses, C is pilloried as someone who is selfish rather than altruistic for not choosing to support B's cause. The faulty syllogism remains that C is failing to do his duty here. C should do his duty. So C should be made to do it. And that syllogism as a bludgeon remains an ever-present threat from everyone who wants to do good with someone else's resources and finds coercion an acceptable mechanism. To Rand, Combs' view of altruism is logically impossible, joyless, and liberty excluding. By the way, I comment about some stuff I said earlier. Like, I'm not saying that there's not logical arguments against altruism. I was just saying that I didn't think that what was presented in this piece was like sufficient. I was just reflecting that I might have miscommunicated about that. Okay. So to Rand, Comte's view of altruism is logically impossible, joyless, and liberty excluding, and has enabled vast harms to be imposed on vast numbers. It does not deserve deference as a guide to morality. Sure. I would say that's an understatement, but sure, okay. However, Rand offers no criticism of voluntary benevolence. That's true. Properly defined within its scope within the context of it being offered in a non-sacrificial way. Fine, sure. That is why we should still care. That is why we should still care about her objections to altruism, which we now mistakenly take to mean whatever voluntary individual choices people make to be generous to others. Now, this is FEE is like a libertarian organization. Libertarians have this thing, and I used to be a libertarian, so I'm speaking, I speak with full authority of former libertarian YouTube internet person. Where it's sort of like a statist conception of morality or something. And it's like they don't get that morality and immorality encompasses more than like the use of force or non-initiation of force or something like that, which is why I think this guy was so focused on, pure, full, 100% Comtean altruism and how it leads to violations of liberty. And he's like, But if it's voluntary individual choices, then it's okay. Well, it might be okay. It's not okay if people are making those individual choices using altruist morality as a guide. It's not something that the state should interfere with. If that's what people choose to do, that's an issue for, morality, for individual choice, for voluntary persuasion, for philosophical education to solve and address. And there's a difference between, having your wealth forcibly extracted for stuff you don't want it to be, versus somebody giving, some money away because they feel like they have to be a good person. Those are different situations. They're both bad, though. And this is sort of like, whitewashing some of the more mixed altruist stuff, as being compatible with Rand, or at least trying to muddy the waters enough so that people can read it in that way. So I think it's very insidious, honestly, and I think it's very troubling. What libertarians are putting out there as compatible with objectivism, with objectivist philosophy. Rand reminds us of the central defense against the threat of coercion lurking beyond altruistic demands placed on people. It lies in protecting individual self-ownership and the property rights that derive from it. Well, so individual self-ownership. Charles was criticizing the self-ownership idea in one of his podcasts. And it's like, I don't know that self-ownership, I think I at least agreed with the general spirit of it. I don't know that I would take self-ownership. Like, this seems to say that self-ownership is the starting point. I wouldn't deny that, you own your body. Like, I own my body, and that's, I get to decide what to do with it, what what things to subject it to, what risks to take with it, all that sort of thing. But I don't know that I would say that that's sort of the base. Because that's ownership is a property concept. But property is a bundle of rights that some entity has over some matter or concretized idea in reality. And so, you need sort of the entity. Like, the entity needs to be first. I'm thinking of the hierarchy issue, that sometimes comes up in objectivism. Which I have to say on that particular point, though, so maybe I'll just move on for now. When that is maintained as fundamental, my power to choose what to do with myself and my property, including when my conclusion is I can contribute to cause X, but I choose not to, is accepted as legitimate. Well, is accepted as legitimate. There's, what does that mean? Like as within the scope of your, rights as a property owner, sure, but you could still be open to moral criticism. If, for example, somebody makes the case that, you're choosing, you have a bunch of money, you don't really know you don't have a great personal use for it, so you've decided you want to give some of it away. And you're trying to figure out the best cause or whatever, the best organization to give it to that would do the most good according to your values. And somebody presents an argument that, say, the Sense Foundation, for example, is the best because, curing, aging is a terrible scourge, and curing aging is a benefit, and longer lives is a value to you, value to everybody. And you're like, I don't know. And you sort of evade. And then you say, yeah, I could contribute to Sense, but I choose not to. Well, certainly that would be, nobody from the government should be like, oh no, you're going to give to Sense, whether you like it or not. But that might not be legitimate morally. Thus, we would soundly reject the view that, apart from such times as someone manages to perform some act of self-sacrifice, he possesses no moral significance. I find the writing here, I mean, it's a common thing, but I think as a professor, I guess, but it's like us, we, like, who's he speaking for? Oops. Anyway, a side comment. With the coercive violation of rights, liberty without the coercive violation of rights, I should say, liberty can be maintained. The vast majority, well, I mean, it's like I have an objection every sentence, or at least a doubt or hesitation. I mean, the coercive violation of rights involves the violation of liberty, but the lack of coercive violation of rights is not sufficient for maintaining liberty. It's like you need a whole worldview to maintain that's like consistent and persuasive, or else somebody will say, hey, somebody will get the bright idea to violate rights for the public good, and then it's 2020 and you have the Democrats running a socialist. The vast majority of people would not only be generous, they would have far more to be generous with. Their voluntary arrangements, including their chosen generosity, creates a better world than comes altruism. So yeah, I thought this was pretty bad. I guess I agree with Charles about this. Charles TEW. Because it's soft selling Rand as mainly being against altruism, and then like pure altruism, only 100% altruism, and then focusing on the political consequences of pure altruism, and then saying that's bad. And like, yes, pure altruism is bad. The political consequences of pure altruism are bad. Rand would agree with that, but her point was much, much broader than that. And this piece sort of subtly misrepresents the broader critique in order to try and engage in some sort of, making libertarianism and Rand's view more compatible by washing out some of the distinctive characteristics of Rand's views, which people might find alienating. And I don't think that sort of project is moral or intellectually honest. And I think it's actually dishonest to posit what Rand meant by altruism when you don't actually know what she meant by altruism, and it becomes clear that that's the case that you don't know as you read the essay. So I did not like the essay, and I thought it was pretty bad. And I'm glad though for having gone through the exercise of going through the concretes, because it seems like the sort of thing where if you read it, if you sort of skimmed it, low resolution, so to speak, out of focus, you're like, oh yeah, I read, and altruism bad, bad for liberty, rights good, sure. And you might think, no, this is fine, when it's actually bad in lots of subtle, detailed ways. So, okay, I think I will. So I like to keep my videos approximately an hour. This is going to run a little long, but I'm going to cut it out now, end it now, and maybe I'll look at something else in this collection of essays. That one, the one that I started with, seemed the most interesting. Most of them, though, are on this first page. Like maybe I'd want to look at the Trump ones. I don't know. Yeah, maybe one of the Trump ones next time. We'll see. Okay.